We've been studying from Acts 17, and it starts off with Paul and Silas leaving Philippi. Let's look here. Okay, so they leave Philippi. Right here, and they come all the way down to Thessalonica, which is 100 miles. It looks like it's only about 1.5 inches on this map, but it's 100 miles. In Philippi, they had some problems. They were beaten, and then finally they had to leave town. Only after the town officials recognized them as Roman citizens. And then they went down to Thessalonica. And in each one of these cities, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Paul is going to go into the synagogues of the Jews and teach them Christ from the Scriptures. I find it interesting that Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles, but every chance he got, he went into the synagogues and taught Christ from the Scriptures. So anyway, they went down to Thessalonica, and the Jews got upset with them. And so the brethren removed them, got them down to Berea, which is down here, which is 50 miles. It's 50 miles from Thessalonica to Berea. And in those days, 50 miles means you're going to hoof it. If you were lucky enough to have a horse in the Gentile nation, it'd be a little easier, but 50 miles is 50 miles. So they go to Berea, and what's the first thing they do? They go to a synagogue of the Jews and preach Christ from the Old Testament. And in each one of these places, some believed. Not all of them, but some. So you take some from here, and some from here, and some from here, and pretty soon you got a lot of some. A lot of people that will spread the word. And that's how that went. So that's kind of where we left off last week, was with Paul being removed from Berea and sent down to Athens. So let's see if we can do this thing right. Apparently not. One more. Wow, we got this all backwards. Okay, verse 13. So when the Jews at Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea also, they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and received a command for Silas and Timothy to come to them as soon as possible. So they took him to the sea. What would be the hint there? He was going to take a boat from Berea, and the sea was 20 miles outside of Berea, so they had to walk 20 miles to get to the ocean, get to the Adriatic Sea. And then he would take a ship to Athens, which is 200 miles. So it'd probably take them 3 or 4 days to get there, depending on the winds and the tides and that sort of thing. Do you ever stop to think that maybe he got seasick all the times he was on the water? If you've never been seasick, you haven't lived. So a group of brethren from Berea took Paul and took him over to the sea and went with him, if he took a boat or walked it doesn't matter, to Athens. It's like the Jews wanted to harm Paul, and these brethren were going to see to it that that didn't happen. So they accompanied him as far as Athens. And then when they got there, they left him, and he commanded them to tell Silas and Timothy to come as soon as they can, to remain there. I got that wrong. They were to remain there, Silas and Timothy. And then when he got to Athens, he said, send for them, have them come here. So A little confusion there on my part. But they escorted him as far as Athens, and most of the commentaries that I have read said these men were armed. The Jews intended to do Paul harm, physical harm. And so he was attended by some of the brethren, doesn't say how many, but it's my understanding they were probably armed so they could protect Paul. And Paul got to Athens. He's by himself. It says now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, he was waiting for Silas and Timothy to come to him. His spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. So he was reasoning in the synagogue. Here again, he's in a synagogue. That's 3 cities in a row: Thessalonica, Berea, and now Athens, where there are synagogues, and that's the first place he goes. He goes in to reason with the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. So he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, the proselytes, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be present. Now those wouldn't have been Jews, those would have been Gentiles, the citizens of Athens, and all their makeup, their religious makeup. We'll get to that in a minute. In fact, in the next verse. And also some of them were of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him. Some were saying, what would this idle babbler wish to say? Idle babbler means seed picker. And he seems to be a proclaimer of strange deities because he is preaching Jesus and the resurrection. So unlike preaching to the Jews from the scriptures, now he has to deal with the Gentiles in a totally different way. They don't know anything about the scriptures, about the Old Testament, about Jewish behavior and their religious beliefs and practices. So he's going to speak to these people in a totally different way because he has to. And we get a little hint here because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. So you can know that he at least preached that much. Actually preached a lot more than that, as we'll see here in a little bit. But his spirit being provoked means it was stirred up, exasperated. One historian said, there's more idols in Athens than there are people. And if you think about that, even if it's half right, think about how many gods they must have worshipped. And for every Roman god, there was a Greek god, a counterpart. So there must have been statues everywhere. Mike, you were going to say something? I needed to drink anyway. Bill? Yeah. Mike would like the mic.
Paul, with the truth in Athens, would be like a house painter in a 100-year-old town. There's work on every hand. Everywhere he looked, there was an idol that countered the truth of the one true God. Mm-hmm. And so, some men would look at that and say, well, I better tuck tail and get out of town because I ain't got anybody that's going to listen to me here. But Paul knew, and the Holy Spirit, of course, guided him to speak out and to make the truth about God known. And what they called idle babbling was the wisdom of the ages.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into just how he approached that. And maybe we could learn a little something for ourselves. You got to start where they already know something or think they know something. So when he was waiting in Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him, and he was observing the city full of idols. So he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be present. Those were the Stoics. Where am I? I lost my place. the Stoics and the Epicureans were the vast number of those philosophers that were in Athens at the time. There were others, but these seem to have the majority. You ever heard the expression an Epicurean delight? It means something pleasurable. And that's what Epicurean means. They were seekers of pleasure. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and whatever else you want to throw in. The Stoics, on the other hand, they were Greek philosophers who followed the teaching of Zeno, its founder. Its philosophy was that human beings should be free from passion, unmoved by joy or grief, and to be submissive to natural law, calmly accepting all things as divine will. Of those two, if I had to pick one, which one was closer to the truth? I'd say that the Stoics had it just a little more correct, but they still had it all wrong. But these people, now they listened to Paul. And they said, what is this you're teaching? What's this all about? What's this Jesus thing all about? And if you had never heard that before, you might say the same thing. Well, I never heard of that before. So the Stoic philosophers were conversing with him. Some were saying, what would this idle babbler wish to say? That means seed picker. And the idea that is that he would take a piece of philosophy from this philosopher, this guy who said something, and then another part from over here and another, and put it together and make a whole new philosophy. This is not a new philosophy. This was something that was determined before the foundation of the earth. And Paul is just a messenger. Some kind of messenger for sure, but just a messenger that God loved us and sent his son to die for us and raised him on the third day. Which one of these Greek or Roman gods ever did that? No. Some of them are still broken down there. So he seemed to be a proclaimer of strange deities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. There's a big deal there. You know, we pass over it and we don't really think about it too much. What other deity ever rose from the dead? Bill, you're going to say something? Or are you going to answer the question? Go ahead. I needed to drink anyway.
Yeah, it seems kind of like a strange thing to say with these people who had all these different gods. I mean, you know, how many were there? All different. Did all these different things. They had different, areas they were supposed to be over and different kind of, godly powers. And yet now they say this is a strange deity, something different. And the thing I think, obviously, beside the fact that Jesus is and God are true and they are false, but it's because this Jesus came down to the earth and lived and died and was raised, and that's something they've never heard about. That's one thing that must have made it really strange. We never heard of that before.
Yeah, well, and they wouldn't have. Lee and then Mike.
Yeah, these Greek philosophers at that time, and it had been this way for centuries actually.
Oh yeah.
But the one thing that they really couldn't accept was the idea of someone being resurrected from the dead. Because who in the world would want to be resurrected from the dead to come back and live in this life again?
Yeah.
And they could not see that as a possibility. It was totally ridiculous.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
that was one of the things that the Greeks really got upset with Paul about.
Yeah, yeah. But they didn't understand it. And you stole my thunder, by the way. Mike, now don't steal my thunder.
There's so much of it, it's hard not to.
Oh, wait a minute. Mike. Brenneman.
Stereo. I'm a mic on the right.
Too many mics.
So this is just a good example of one of Satan's most used techniques. He's a master counterfeiter. You name it, in every way. But he's counterfeiting religion and giving people the God of their choice, kind of anything that appeals to them. He also likes to give options, way more options than is healthy, right? But if he can confuse people and make it difficult, this coming Sunday, people will be observing the birth of Jesus. And of course, the Bible never tells us to do that. We're going to talk about the birth of Jesus today, but the Bible never commands us to do that. Boy, he throws out all these man-made traditions and ideas just to give us so many choices. We have to really, really love the truth to find it. A few of these did, and now I'm under your thunder. Anyway, master counterfeiter.
Very good, thank you. And no, you didn't steal my thunder. But when these Stoics and others heard this, they said, this boy got to go before our counselors, our judges of philosophy. So they took him to the Areopagus. Yeah, that word. Why doesn't this happen to Spawn? Okay, now we're going to go. So they took him and they brought him to the Areopagus. I got it written down here too. Anyway, they took him to that place saying, may we know what this new teaching is which you are proclaiming? So they hadn't heard about Christianity. They hadn't heard about Jesus Christ. They hadn't heard about his death, burial, and resurrection. They hadn't heard about the miracles that he performed, and probably hadn't heard about the miracles that Paul performed. So this is all new. And sometimes new things have a hard time getting through our heads. They wanted to know about it. What a setup. What a setup. Because Paul is going to just pull them right in now. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is which you are proclaiming. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. So we want to know what these things mean. Now, all of Athens and the strangers visiting there used to spend their time in nothing other than telling or hearing something new. Well, this is something new, brand new to them. And they wanted to know what he was, because they thought they could have thought that this is an illegal religion and out the door with it. But no. Just a minute. So Paul stood in the, why can't I say this? I don't know, I get it written down here, Areopagus. Boy, there are some words I can say and some I can't. It goes off in my brain just fine, but it doesn't come out my mouth just fine. Mike?
Interesting point. That word Areopagus, that's where we get the word pagan. Mm-hmm. Areopagan.
And a lot of pagan teaching went on there. Just a minute. Let's do this. We'll come back. This is Mars Hill. And this is where that building would have been. And if they'd taken better care of it, it might still be there, but it's not. But it gives you some idea of where he was. Up on hill, on Mars Hill. Now let's go back. Okay, so he was proclaiming something new that they'd never heard before. And that's okay. But then he says, so Paul stood in the midst, there we go again, of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I observe that you're very religious in all respects. Now, what do you suppose that little phrase did for them? Just like Stephen in the Sanhedrin. When Stephen started to speak, they all went. So now he's got their attention. And he said, "Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the object of your worship, all these idols, I also found an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you." In case they missed the God, they had an unknown God. That'll cover it. Okay, now we got them all covered. Paul says, let me tell you about this one. What you did in ignorance in the past, I proclaim this to you. I'm going to proclaim God, a creator, his son who died and was resurrected, and ain't nobody else ever done that. He starts off by saying, the God who made the world and all the things in it. Now that's different than their gods. Actually, some of these guys thought that their gods, up there somewhere I guess, would spit in their hand and go like that, and a planet would come about. Oh, that was one of them. It was all different ways. So the God who made the world and all the things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. There were temples all over Athens. Some of them are still there, broken down, but they're still there. And these people thought that they had to serve these gods, Zeus and Apollo and Isis and any of the others that they had there. Does God need our help? Just a question. Does God need our help? Billy's going like this. No, of course not. And he can't dwell in a temple made with hands. We can't make one big enough. You know, if you took the temple in Jerusalem and compared it to three of the great temples, it was still bigger, and it couldn't hold God either. The universe is his. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life, breath, and all things. So rather than serving him, which humans can't do, he serves us. He gives us life and breath and water and food to eat and clothes on our back and blesses us. William.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of foreign to my thinking there too, is that I hadn't thought before that the gods that these Greeks served actually needed something from earthlings, from people. Well, and that's what he implies here. I mean, he says, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. And so the true God, our God, doesn't need anything. He's a giver, right? He's the one who gives. He wants us to serve him because he's worthy of service, but he doesn't need that. Like, apparently these gods, in their mind anyway, needed something, or else, I don't know, something was wrong. Something would go wrong. They'd starve. I don't know what would happen.
It's paganism in its purest form, actually. Serving some idol, which is deaf and dumb, and putting food out for it and all these other things. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life, breath, and all things. There are three words that would describe God. Anybody know what they are?
Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent.
Omnipresent. That means he's all-powerful, all-knowing, and he's in everywhere at the same time. Do these gods do that? They don't even move. They probably don't even move in the wind. And knowing that our God is omniscient and omnipotent, some of the strange doctrines that come about, repudiate that. I'm thinking of premillennialism. 11 times Jesus said, I must go up to Jerusalem, be killed by men, and rise on the third day. 11 times he said that. And yet there are people today who say, no, he couldn't pull that off. They killed him and that was that. And so we got the church rather than the kingdom. They're denying the fact that God is almighty. He's omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent. And what he says he's going to do, he'll bring about. Or he's none of those things. Okay.
Hey, Bill.
Where are you? Bill.
Right here. Yeah, even though it's not mentioned here, it's good. I think it's important to see, too, that the nature of these gods was so much. I mean, these gods were selfish. They would fight.
They were human.
They would commit adultery in the godly realm.
Of course.
They would do all these things that men and women do on earth.
Yeah.
Whereas our God, our true God, doesn't. He's good and true and right and loving, and so much different than these, which is another reason that shows that he's the true God, because he's not afflicted with human follies.
The Roman and Greek gods, and I've not spent a ton of time reading about them, but some had human personalities. They had anger, and sometimes they were, hard to get along with and all that. That's not our God. We can bow our knee and pray to him anytime we want, and he will hear our prayers and he will answer our prayers, whereas their gods might or might not. And he made from one man, that would be Adam, every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. Stop there. There's always been racial prejudices. You go all the way back to Egypt, they wouldn't eat with the Hebrews. If that's not prejudice, I don't know what is. But we are all the same. There's a really good book called More Than Meets the Eye. I forget who the doctor was who wrote that. But if you're incredibly black and you're incredibly white, you are the same. Under the skin, your blood vessels, your heart, your lungs, your inner organ, they're all the same. Amen. We are all the same. And here Paul is telling them that. From one man, all these nationalities come about, but we are all the same. And we all have, Adam as our forefather. Go ahead. I was on a roll, but go ahead.
You're good. We don't read about nationalities or races until after Genesis chapter 11, where men got high and mighty and thought they could all unite together for an evil purpose, and God separated them and gave them different languages, and with that they migrated to different regions, and they became different in their characteristics as the environment and other things.
And their language.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that on the day of Pentecost, when God reunites the world in Christ, on the day of Pentecost, instead of confusing the language, God united the language. He made them all hear, all there able to hear the truth in their own language.
Right. Good point. But my point was and is that we are all the same. Absolutely. There's just no difference. Some are taller, some are shorter, but we are all the same. And it says also, he made them from one man, every nation of mankind, to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their habitation. Let's see, I got a note on that. God allows nations and has allowed nations like the United States, which we know our history a little bit, to come into existence. And he also from time to time has to destroy those nations. But he has determined an appointed time for those things to happen. He already knows. And the boundaries of their habitation, which means the boundaries of their nations. Like Mexico is Mexico, and Canada is Canada, and the United States is the United States. He's already set their boundaries. That they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. So he set our boundaries, but those people, like the Greeks right now, are groping for God. Grope has the idea of a blind man walking around trying to find his way. That's what they were doing. They were groping for him, trying to find him. And now Paul has revealed him, the Creator, the giver of life, the giver of salvation. All those things God has given us. And what Greek God ever did that? Everybody say no. Though he is not far from each one of us. That's kind of a tough verse to deal with. Go ahead, Bill. Then I'll answer my own question.
Well, just on this part about how that he's appointed times, their times and boundaries of their habitation, he's set it all out before it happened, where Russia would be, where all these countries. What he doesn't appoint or establish is whether or not we'll accept him, because we're groping after him. We're looking and searching and trying to find. Here's the stage, the entire world with the nations the Lord has set up, even though it looks like it's all haphazard to us. But he's set it up just so that we might search after him and decide that we'll love him and not ourselves and love some false god.
Mike, I'll get to my point one of these days, maybe next week, week after. No, go ahead.
So, I just forgot what I was going to say. Don't go for it.
It happens to me all the time. I forget words.
I know what I was going to say.
Oh, Bill, come on back. Make it good now.
I will. I'll try. The idea that that if they would seek God, and men and women of all nations seek after him, feeling out their way to the truth, receiving from God, of course, ultimately revelation. But the fact is that the truth fits in the hearts of all men. It doesn't matter where you live on this planet. If once you understand the truth, it meets the needs of every single human being who's ever lived. And so, in that sense, God is there's a place, there's a part that says this is where God fits, and He makes us whole.
Yeah. One more. Now go away. Oh, Florento.
In verse 27, it says they would seek God if perhaps they might grope for him and find him. This reminds me that men are known to, instead of worshiping the Creator and glorifying him, they instead worship their creation and glorifying themselves. This reminds me, I believe, is from the book of Romans. Somewhere, I don't remember exactly where it's at.
You're Romans 1. Yeah. Romans 1:20. You can know that God exists without the Bible. You can know God exists through the creation. The creation is so beautiful, and it is so complicated and so sophisticated. The odds, one guy did the odds that even a cell evolving is like 1 in a billion, trillion. I mean, it's an infinite number. You can know that God exists. Being a salmon fisherman, I've not had much lately to do that, but not much of a chance. But a salmon can swim all the way up into Montana. A big old king salmon, 70, 80-pound king salmon, and they found some up there even bigger than that, can make a red, that's the bed, but it's a red, deposit their eggs, and then the fish that come out of that red can swim down to the Pacific Ocean, swim all the way around to Japan, and swim back again to the very same red. That's instinct, but it's something that God put in them. It's not something that could evolve. If they're looking for evolution, the salmon might get lost, wind up in the Philippines. They couldn't take the warm water. We can know that God exists through the creation. I know I've told you this story before, but I'll tell it to you again because I like telling it. Where I grew up on Beacon Hill, and Sharon can testify to this, our neighbors, Paul and Reva Dyro, were fuchsia growers. They would grow 50 or 60,000 fuchsias a year. And then they were also landscape architects, and so they set their yard up in such a way to show off the beauty of the fuchsias. Most of them set up in a lath house, but they probably had 1,000 or so laying around. And they had variegated plants, plus they had trees and bushes that were fragrant. So to walk through their yard and smell and see all that beauty. And here's a kid who really didn't appreciate any of that. I like the smell a little bit, and I like the Sage Lounge because they let me go in there and sit and read. But gorgeous. And something that beautiful, something that complicated, and so hard to raise fuchsias in the first place, much less as many as they did. You can know that God exists because something that beautiful can't come about on its own. I sure would have liked to seen the Garden of Eden. Boy, I bet that was something. And the fragrances, oh. Okay, I'm through.
I appreciate this. Sometimes when we think about the subject of God is evident in his creation and looking at nature, it's good to take the time to think about what the world already knows about that they completely ignore constantly. Mm-hmm. Is that evolution will talk about an individual development of the salmon and how, look how it evolved to have this, these traits and these skills, and in some shows they'll call it creature powers or whatever. How do they get back and how do they go out, right? All these different things, and you're like, wow, yeah, that's pretty amazing per that individual. And then they'll talk about the ecosystem, how it's reliant on all these things where this animal the salmon relies on this animal. And that animal relies on this animal, and that animal relies on this tree, and this tree relies on that animal, and then all of a sudden you get back to, it relies on the salmon, right? And then your mind just gets blown, right? And they talk about how we have to be careful about upsetting this balance. And they completely ignore that could not come out from accident.
Yeah.
That has to be created, controlled, and monitored. And if something happens to it, he has the power to make sure it's sustained for us.
Who monitors all this? You mentioned monitors. Who monitors all this?
He does. He invented it, and he has to keep it under control because we're not good at keeping it in balance.
If he doesn't monitor it, we're all going to fly off into outer space. We might miss the Super Bowl. Mike, let me share a quick poem. Won't take but a second. In Paul and Reva's yard, they had a lath house, a small one, probably not much wider than one of these benches, and probably 12, 14 feet deep. But she had a poem in there, and I always thought that poem really did point toward God creating all that they had. It says, "The kiss of the sun for pardon, the songs of the bird for mirth, man is nearer to God in a garden than anywhere else on earth." Now that's not true. You can bow your head and be before his presence, but when you're in a garden, say, as beautiful as theirs was, or even Point Defiance or somewhere else, you can see God's handiwork. You can know that he exists. All right, I'm through.
Man has not only, thought about how that things could have come about on their own and without God's involvement. Whoops, oh, there we go. Man's, not only thought about those things, but there was an effort in, I think it was the 80s or the 90s, the thing called the biodome.
Oh, yeah.
And there was an enclosed structure that they proposed to put a group of people in, a limited number, and have just all of the things within it that would provide completely for it for a period of 2 years. Mm-hmm. Kind of a preparation for going to another planet, but also implication as to, whether, it could happen.
It didn't work.
It didn't. They actually found out later on, they stayed in it for quite some time, but then they found out later on that during the time they were in it, there were things that were brought into the biodome from outside.
It didn't work.
So they weren't even able to, create an enclosed environment where, God's handiwork could be short-circuited, so to speak.
Yeah.
It didn't
no,
work.
I found that that was back in was it the 80s or the 90s? Yeah, so way back there. That's not so way back for me. Those were good times. And the next verse I find interesting. "For in him we live and move and exist." He gives us air, he gives us water, he gives us food, he takes good care of us. Matthew 6:33, "Seek the kingdom and all these things will be given to you." He gives us these things, the good guys and the bad guys, hoping that they'll all become good guys. He says, "For in him we live and move and exist, even as some of your poets have said, for we are also his children." I find it interesting that Paul knew about Greek poetry. When he went to school, he went to the school of Gamaliel, which I said was probably like Stanford or Yale or Harvard. He must have taken classes in poetry, in literature, in geography, in culture, because he was one smart guy. And think, God chose him before he was born, that he would go to this school and he would know all these things and be able to converse with these Gentiles on their level. Actually, he was bringing them up to his level, but for we are his children. What time we got? I got 3 minutes, and I can do this in 3 minutes. Albert Barnes writes about our relationship to God and idols. He says, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by art and through man, or thought of man. The argument of the apostle is this. This is what Paul is arguing. Since we are formed by God, is that true? Amen. Everybody go like this, yes. Since we are like him, living and intelligent beings, since we are more excellent in our nature than the most precious and ingenious works of art, it is absurd to suppose that the original source of our existence can be like gold, silver, or stone. Man himself is far more excellent than an image of wood and stone. How much more excellent still must be the great foundation and source of our wisdom and intelligence. Somebody say amen. That's true. Albert Barnes got it right. I like his commentaries. I don't always agree with him, but I like them. Here's what Albert Clark had to say. This inference of the apostle was very strong and conclusive, and his arguments run thus. If we are the offspring of God, he cannot be like those images of gold or silver or stone, which are formed by the art and the device of men, for the parent must resemble his offspring. Seeing, therefore, that we are living and intelligent beings, he from whom we have derived that being must be living and intelligent. It is necessary also that the object of religious worship should be much more excellent than the worshiper. But a man is, by innumerable degrees, more excellent than images made of gold, silver, or stone. And yet it would be irreverent to worship a man. How much more so to worship these images as gods? Bad enough that you would worship a man, and there is men on this planet who are worshipped. Boy, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes when they pass away and stand before God. But to worship a piece of rock, give me a break. I'm out of time, and I was just getting started. It takes 10 minutes to warm up, you know. Before a pitcher went in a game, we'd have him pitch an inning, and then he'd pitch okay once we put him in. So I thank you for your time. Next week we'll finish this up. May God bless each and every one of you.